But there was quite a bit to applaud last night in his address at the United Nations.
I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake.
We are going to stay with that speech because in a truth bomb designed to burst open the bunker of global bureaucracy and control that is the UN headquarters in New York, Donald Trump's speech last night didn't miss. I mean, it was a powerful speech designed to not only kill a few woke sacred cows, but also to eat them in one of his famous burgers as well. Because whatever else might be said about him, Donald Trump understands two things. First, that much of what's been happening in the modern West is economic and societal suicide. And second, that there's no office in the world with more power to change that than the US presidency. What's more, he's clearly decided that he's not going to die wondering whether he could have made a difference second time around in the White House. Last night's speech to the United Nations was devastating to the climate activist ecosystem that's enjoyed 30 years of grifting, courtesy of taxpayers that have been bludgeoned into submission, and the indoctrinated generations that are growing up and filling its woke funding pipeline. Now, I doubt there's ever been a more powerful public denunciation of what Trump regards as the two most insidious failures of modern public policy, namely destroying energy sovereignty and in an attempt to combat climate change, and allowing barely controlled mass migration, notionally because of the economist Ponzi scheme that any growth is good, but in reality because governing elites in the West have become morally queasy about their own Judeo-Christian foundations. Trump's speech wasn't so much a salvo as it was a bunker-busting bomb at the very epicentre of a global governance structure that is crippling Western civilization. It was a direct repudiation of the two policy directions that have been at the heart of the left's agenda and that have been partially accepted even by much of the mainstream right. Worse still, the harm of these two cancers of climate policy and mass migration have been massively accelerated over the past decade, especially in the Anglosphere and in places like Australia. Perhaps it's because our Prime Minister senses that his US counterpart is the antithesis of almost everything he holds dear and is working towards, that it's taken him so long to arrange any face-to-face contact. In contrast, look how quickly he scooted off to Beijing, where he's far more comfortable with the leadership of Communist China. So what did Trump say? Well, first, on climate change. He skewered them on the consistency of so-called expert scaremongering that's become increasingly hysterical over time, but rarely accurate. He pointed to the UN's own 1982 declaration that by the year 2000, climate change would cause a global catastrophe, and then he exposed just how wrong they have been.
Global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world, but then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change, because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
I might add, he said at the top of the speech that his auto cue broke down, so much of this speech was without a note. He directly addressed the current leadership of the UN, Britain, Canada and Australia with this warning.
And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail.
You can say that again. And as if he hadn't pulled off an already rhetorical king hit, Trump continued on the subject of mass immigration.
And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail. I'm the President of the United States, but I worry about Europe. I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake, and they cannot let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice, you want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage.
Didn't miss. What about this?
And I have to say, I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, terrible, terrible mayor, and it's been so changed, so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law, but you're in a different country. You can't do that. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe if something is not done immediately. This cannot be sustained. What makes the world so beautiful is that each country is unique. But to stay this way, every sovereign nation must have the right to control their own borders. Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything. Where migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims, or claimed refugee status for illegitimate reasons, they should, in many cases, be immediately sent home. And while we will always have a big heart for places and people that are struggling and truly compassionate, answers will be given. We have to solve the problem, and we have to solve it in their countries, not create new problems in our countries. When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime, it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Now, because this was a precision assault on the two great political parties of our time, there will be a furious reaction. Now, already I've noted today the number of mainstream media outlets that are even declining to even cover his climate change comments. Others, though, well, after those comments and more than on immigration, they went off the deep end. But because what Trump's saying is essentially true, just possibly, this could be the wake-up call that the West needs. We can but hope.
I just want to repeat that immigration and the high cost of so-called green renewable energy is destroying a large part of the free world and a large part of our planet. Countries that cherish freedom are fading fast because of their policies on these two subjects. You need strong borders and traditional energy sources if you are going to be great again.
Because what Trump has said is so totally at odds with much of the Western political establishment, there'll be a renewed and perhaps even more concerted effort to ridicule the man and to destroy his presidency. Initially, at least, this speech will feed into the narrative that Trump is a Neanderthal sort of throwback. But because the so-called green transition is going badly in all the countries that are taking it seriously, like Australia, and because there are few citizens, particularly in the Anglosphere, who aren't asking themselves, how on earth is this happening to my country, that speech will resonate. In the short term, it will present a dilemma for Anthony Albanese, whose government has presided over 3 years of historically high immigration and who just announced hyper-ambitious economy-wrecking emissions reduction targets for 2035. Almost inevitably, he will say that the problems the president highlighted don't apply to Australia, but you know they do. And given he's only just secured that formal meeting with Trump on October 20, Albanese won't want to jeopardise it by directly disagreeing with the president's blistering critique of what is Australia's current policy, no less than the policy of Britain and Europe too.
Look, I'm not a commentator. I'll leave that to you and the columnists. But it was a great privilege to be at the United Nations this morning to hear President Trump and other leaders, the Secretary General of the United Nations and others, put forward their perspectives.
Seemed to answer out that. But whatever the public pleasantries, Trump's message is at odds with everything our Prime Minister has ever done and said his entire public life. And that has grave consequences for our alliance with the US. But it's also at odds with much of the Liberal Party too and the UK Conservatives. After the previous coalition government initially scrapped the carbon tax and declared that the emissions obsessions were over, the Liberals then reversed course under Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, eventually adopting net zero on the grounds that it would be damaging to our international standing and harmful to the chances of regaining those teal seats if we didn't take climate change seriously. Well, not only has lurching to the left not made a scrap of difference in those teal seats, in fact, it's made it worse, it's also cost the Lib's credibility with Conservatives. The recent primary vote of 27 in News poll this week makes that perfectly plain. And while the opposition's disastrous defeat was mostly due to its lack of policy fight, Labor pinning the Trump-light label on Peter Dutton didn't help, because the Trump style doesn't often play well outside the American heartland. The coalition base, already restive at Susan Lee's lack of policy direction, will be further fired up by this latest Trump broadside, even though his MAGA movement won't directly translate into political success here, given our somewhat different culture, different institutional structures and radically different voting system. But the challenge for the coalition is to take his message, that message in those words, and recraft a platform that's radically different to the current Labor-light offering, focused on the potent beachheads of energy and high immigration. Still, a fortnight after global conservatism was rocked by the public execution of Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump's response has been an eviscerating attack on everything that Kirk was trying to stop. Now, make no mistake, whether you like the man or not, this was a speech for the ages.